Okay, we are live streaming. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the sixth meeting of the Government Transition Advisory Committee's Districts and Council Operations Subcommittee. Today is Thursday, March 28th, and we'll be here from 4 to 5:30. My name is Julia Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Engagement and Community Participation Manager for the transition. Our co-chairs, Jose and Juliet, will facilitate today's meeting. Next slide, please. Just going to take a moment to go over some meeting logistics. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, and a recording of the meeting will be posted on the city's transition webpage under past meetings and events. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning available, which you can access by clicking on the CC button on the bottom right of your screen. For committee members, please take this moment to change your chat settings to everyone so that folks listening in can view the chat. And please remember that the chat is part of the public meeting record. For community members listening in, we have the Zoom Q&A feature available. You can submit questions or comments through that function. We may not live answer all questions, but we do read them and they do become part of the public meeting record. At today's meeting, we're not taking verbal public comment, but you can submit public comment at any time through our online comment form, by calling us at 311 or by emailing us at transition@portlandoregon.gov. And if you want to give verbal public comment to the Government Transition Advisory Committee, you can sign up now to do so at our next full meeting on April 9th. With that, I will pass it to Jose to review today's agenda.
Thank you, Julia. Today's agenda includes subcommittee business, the next steps for existing recommendations or work before the current engagement period, an update on the engagement to date, and our reflections on our work based on the engagement. And before we adjourn our meeting today, as always, we'll agree to the next steps. Next slide, please. For subcommittee business, Lori's unable to attend today's meeting. Otherwise, we expect full attendance. We do need to approve the February 29th meeting summary. Does anyone have any proposed revisions before I take a motion to approve? Okay, seeing none, I'll take a motion.
This is Zach. I move to approve these meeting minutes.
Thanks, Zach. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Juliet. Okay, so with the motion, do we have any objections? Seeing none, summary is approved. Now, Juliet and I want to encourage folks to begin thinking about whether they want to serve as the next rotation of subcommittee co-chairs. We're okay serving through the end of our current phase of work in May, but we do want to see if others want to take over for the engagement phase this summer. We'll remind folks again this at the next meeting, but if you're interested or want to talk about it or have any questions, please let me or Julia know. Thank you. Next slide, please. As always, our working agreement, they state as follows: in discussions, challenge ideas rather than individuals, offer constructive suggestions, approach different opinions with curiosity, seek to understand, keep the needs and concerns of the local community and the larger region at the forefront of the work, arrive on time and prepared to the best of your ability, let the group know if you're unable to attend the meeting, and the co-chairs will aim to incorporate tools for breathers, keep multitasking to a minimum, keep focus on the objectives of the meeting, utilize co-chairs to know additional topics for discussion by submitting topics in writing via email. Next slide, please. Honor the decisions of the group. Contribute to the overall success of the group by finding ways to participate that best meets your needs. Step up, step back. Collectively work to ensure that every member who wants to be heard is heard. Embrace conflict and work with your fellow committee members and staff to find ways to give each other feedback. The co-chairs will aim to incorporate various feedback tools and use I statements. Next slide, please. We now have 4 sets of recommendations out, and we want to spend time ensuring that we agree to what the next steps are going to be for each set of those recommendations. February 8th, we sent a letter to City Council finding proposed staffing levels for the future of council, saying that they're inadequate. Council will consider staffing levels for the future council as they consider the 2025 budget. But before the mayor releases their proposed budget on May 2nd, there are 3 budget community listening sessions coming up in April on the 10th, the 13th, and the 15th. We propose asking the GTAC co-chairs to testify on behalf of GTAC at one or more of those sessions. So I do welcome folks' thought about this and any other proposed steps. Any thoughts, suggestions? Okay. Joe?
Yeah, I just want to know, as a matter of sort of protocol or procedure, when we write a letter, I presume it's to the mayor, council, and transition team. Do we expect any sort of written response from any of the above? Or, I mean, we've got, I think, 4 letters out. I'm not sure all of these are letters, but I'm just wondering what the protocol is once we send these. What to expect.
I don't know if Julia was able to fix that. She was able to fix the sound.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can't with my headphones and I'm in a room with other folks. So I'm sorry, Destiny, am I interrupting? Oh,
No,
okay.
no.
So no, I guess would be my answer. And I don't believe that any of the letters you wrote, you requested a written response. I think that would probably be what would trigger it. And the letters are very different from each other. So like the onboarding one has this very clear ask about a monthly meeting. I don't think our more kind of budget related ones had a specific ask, which is why we're talking now about kind of what folks want as the next steps. Thanks.
Thank you, Julia. Destiny?
I'm wondering for like testifying, if we are asking GTAC members to do it, are we then saying that we want to agree with what's being said if it's specifically through GTAC like messaging? And then second, how to organize that, because I've never written myself on a docket before to do it. And I don't know how many have, I know people have here, but like I haven't. And so those are just logistical questions popping up in my head. And I don't know if Joe had like a response. So thank you.
Thank you, Destiny. Yes, and I do agree with you. I think if GTAC was going to testify, whoever was the co-chairs were standing in for GTAC, it would have to be a prepared statement that we all agreed on, not just like if one of us decided to go testify before council. I think it'd be different. I do agree with that, and I'm sure Julia will help us with the logistics once we get to that point. Are there any other questions or comments? Zach?
I was gonna chat this, but I feel I might as well respond and over with my voice. I do think it's important that we speak to council during these budget listening sessions. And
Oh, Zach, you muted yourself.
it was my cat, sorry. But I do think it's important. I do think we could probably relatively easily provide or write up what is acceptable language by largely utilizing the same language that's in our letter. So I don't know to what extent we actually, if we stick to that language, if we need to go through the process of getting the full committee's approval. But you know, if it's functionally challenging and we do feel like we need to have that, I intend to provide public comment on my own behalf.
Thanks, Zach. Juliet?
Yeah, I appreciate what Destiny was saying, and I was trying to sort of visualize the logistics too. And I guess I thought initially that our letters and our motions would guide us, but definitely whatever we're going to do needs to be coordinated, whether it's a formal something or not. I think if we stray beyond the letters and the motions, then we are on our own, or we do need more of a process to approve or review that. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Julia. And yes, what Julia said in the chat that the testimony should be on which GTAC voted on and approved is exactly what I feel as well. If we are going to deviate from that at all, we would have to bring it back to the full committee to vote on. So if we decide that we do want to have the co-chairs make a statement if they can, or someone go make that statement, it would have to be strictly confined to what we have already agreed on in the letter. Joe?
Yeah, I think this is something that ought to come up in the whole GTAC, but we may testify in things like this as individuals. And in addition to that, someone may speak on behalf of GTAC. And I think it needs to be crystal clear when you are speaking on behalf of GTAC and when you're not and you're speaking as an individual. In most settings, that's going to be a really hard distinction to make. The city council will get it.
Yes. There is the problem where everyone else might not. So there is a little bit of a fine line to work there. But I do think that since we voted on the letter and we voted on sending the letter, if we stick to the what's on the letter, I don't think we really, in my opinion, we don't have to vote on whether or not someone reads the letter out loud at a council meeting or gives testimony based on that letter. If that's my opinion. I don't know if anyone feels differently. But I would say that I do think that's important because it's not just a letter that gets to the office, but then other people can hear us and see it. So, Destiny?
I get like a little hesitant, like if you're speaking on both as like a GTAC member and then like an individual citizen, because I feel like those lines can easily get blurred, and I totally understand that everyone had their own opinions before we created the recommendation. So like if for some reason, this is just my thinking, if for some reason you want to hold your truth and your opinions as an individual citizen, I think your testimony should come as that, not a GTAC. And if we want to like push the recommendations, then someone else should be there as GTAC, solely as GTAC, to push that forward, just so that we hear your truths, but at the same time, the committee's work stays the same. That's just me flagging that.
I agree with that 100%, Destiny. And do we have a motion for that? We can move that someone present this at a council meeting, but that person only be there to testify as GTAC and nothing else. So if Zach wanted to go as his own personal person to testify, then Destiny, maybe you would do the GTAC testify. You know, if we can make that a motion. Is that a motion you would like to make, Destiny? If not, someone else.
I'm happy to make a motion. So I move that for my own behalf that I can testify or provide public comment on behalf of GTAC on council staffing or district offices. So I'll just leave that motion, then I have a comment.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
And There was a question Destiny asked if we wanted to assign people already. I guess we don't have to assign people. For me, it was more saying that we're going to do it. And the piece that is missing in Zach's motion that I would like to friendly amendment add is that whoever is testifying on behalf of GTAC is only there to do that they can't be there for another reason.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to accept that amendment.
Okay. Do we have any discussion, Zach?
Yeah, so I guess my question, right, is my preference is that we have more of us represented, and in multiple places, right? So I'm only available for the 15th, which is the last listening session. But as I suggested, happy to provide on the ones that I was maybe more involved in the writing of. And I would love if others are interested in this opportunity to represent GTAC in all phases. So maybe we have more than just one person talking about all 4 of these recommendations. Because I'm imagining that there's going to be time limitations, and I think there's just more benefit in show of force.
Thanks, Zach. I agree. It'd probably be good for us to have different people for each of one of these topics, different letters, different people. Destiny?
I was just gonna say, I don't know. So hard right now, like the dates and the time and like those logistical pieces, like it's hard to be like, I can go, but then like they expect me there, and for some reason, I can't be there. So right now, like trying to assign, I don't like other than Zach mentioning the 15th, I have no concept of dates. Like I'm trying to find that right now to then organize ourselves to say, yeah, I'm gonna be there to additionally testify, or like I would like to be the official GTAC voice for district offices. Like I personally need times and dates, and Zach put it in the chat. That was just my comment.
Okay, thanks, Destiny. Terry?
Yeah, I guess I'm available. I'm happy to do it on council staffing, district offices, engagement, wherever you need me. That said, I'm also more than willing to be the non-GTAC person there testifying and ranting about stuff in my own personal capacity. And I think that's okay. I just want to clarify that. It's related to these topics. I am opinionated about them and would be willing to go further than the letter. Anyway, that's asking for clarification, but I am available to be official and message.
Juanita? Are you muted still?
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm being late. So I just wanted a little bit of clarification because I just joined you and I'm not so sure. I will just listen in the last piece. I would love to speak about human community engagement, but I would like to have more clarification about what is this? Is this a series of hearings that are going to take place? Because like I said, I just got joined the group.
Yes, we're talking about the testifying at different hearings on right now. We're talking primarily on council staffing levels, but there were potentially we could testify on the 4 different recommendations that we put out, but they would be confined to what's in the letter. We've talked about not deviating from that, because if we did deviate from what we already approved, then we'd have to take it back to the full committee to get further approval.
Yeah, totally. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Yeah,
No problem.
definitely I will put my name down for community engagement.
Joe?
Yeah, I want to say 2 totally different things. One is, if these are budget hearings, it seems that the 2 of these recommendations that explicitly have budgetary components are council staffing and district offices, where we've addressed council budget decisions. it may be that community engagement and onboarding have budget implications too. I'd have to think about that, but those two at least do. The other thing, totally different, is I think maybe it rises to the level of a working agreement or maybe not, but I think there ought to be an agreement among the whole GTAC about anytime you're in public, making a very clear distinction whether you're speaking for GTAC or as an individual. And if there are this kind of situation where somebody is specifically delegated to speak for GTAC, that person should refrain from speaking as an individual.
Joe, yeah, maybe we should make that distinction, but I will say maybe it's been a while, but we did get a whole training on this and what we needed to say and what to avoid and what to do. So I'll have maybe Julie just I'll just email out the link again. So
This
people
is
can view
this
it.
is different from that training.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
how-
The-
okay.
I believe that the training was very clear lines for us not to step over. This is really more in the spirit of the working agreements to be really clear to make that distinction.
And I will say that it's kind of gone into we can testify in other areas, but right now we're really just talking about council staffing because that one has budget. So that's why we were talking about that. Zach?
I was recalling that we had this conversation when Commissioner Gonzalez and Ryan were proposing what might be a amendment or something to put on the ballot for amending the charter. So we can reflect back to that meeting if we want specific language. I don't know if we enshrined it in any way where we added it to, I mean, clearly don't have it in our working agreements, but I think, Joe, you're absolutely right. We should raise this with the larger group. I also think it might be worth our while to have some more kind of formal process of like an agreement as we did with our working agreements, which looking at Terry, know that he was not too keen on having working agreements, but to have a everybody agrees to certain language to, or refraining from alluding to being in GTAC or however we want to decide as a full group. But I think that conversation maybe is worthwhile to have an agreement to have at the full committee.
Juanita?
Yes, what I hear before is that these are going to testify, we're going to testify, or you're requesting for people to testify based on the recommendations that we send in writing. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're not requesting for people to testify at the moment. We're just saying that we want to go testify and that whoever does the testifying can only be there
Okay,
on behalf of GTAC.
Yeah,
So
no,
we're
let me
asking, the whole conversation started with the people testifying are going to be the co-chairs. We're not asking for people to testify. It's if the co-chairs are available, the co-chairs will be doing the
But
testifying.
they will do the whole testifying then for all
Yeah,
of them.
just like the letters, whenever GTAC sends a letter, it's signed, it's from the co-chairs on behalf of the committee.
I would like to recommend that maybe the people who were the most involved in redacting and pulling together those letters participate in the presentation or in the testifying, because I think that just following the body of the letters, I think that at least I've been participating at least on I think almost in the 3 of the letters. And it does a lot of a strong dialogue and a lot of thinking and about what is going to be included in the letter, and making sure that what is included in the letter are core issues that impact every specific area. So I think if the agreement, one of the agreements would be very helpful would be, and I agree with Joe, in terms of making an agreement, is that we have to follow the letters, the outline of the letter.
Yes, that's
Because-
part of the motion that's right now on the.
Yeah, that it has to be the outline of the letter, because even though when we were trying to write, when Juliet helped us to do the letter and you know, cleaning up the letter for the community engagement, we realized that the fact that she didn't participate in all of the discussions that we had as a team when we were pulling the letter together, that specific fact didn't help her to really understand all of the background and the scope of the things that we were saying in the letter. And I want to make sure that that doesn't get lost.
Thank you,
Because-
Juanita.
Yeah.
Thank
so,
you.
Yeah.
Okay, so can we vote now? We're voting on, do we want someone to go to council to testify on behalf of GTAC, but they can only be there for GTAC? Do I have any objections, or can we pass this by consensus? Juanita, your hand's still raised from before.
Oh, no. Let me put it down.
Joe, do you have an objection?
No, it's a question. What we're talking about now is specifically testimony about these things because
About council staffing, because we were talking.
about council staffing.
Yes.
Good, because I think what you just said is a really good principle for all GTAC testimony, but we can't bind the rest of GTAC on other things.
Yes, we're talking about just council staffing. We spent a lot of time on number one, so hopefully this long discussion will make it so when we talk about the next four, it'll go really fast. So any objections? No? Okay, so it passes. Our next steps for council staffing is to coordinate with Julia and get someone to testify based solely on the contents of the letter in front of council. Okay, next, now on March 15th, we sent a letter to Chief Administrative Officer with onboarding recommendations. In that letter, we request a regular monthly meeting between transition staff and select GTAC members. The following GTAC members have expressed interest in participating in the monthly meetings: Amy, Destiny, Joe, Juanita, and Lori. The first meeting has been scheduled for April 23rd. We hope that those who attend the meetings can take responsibility for providing updates to this subcommittee. Are there any other next steps that folks want to propose in regards to onboarding? Terry?
Yeah, I guess just a quick thing to folks that are going to those meetings, you know, materials that come out of those meetings can be distributed to the rest of us.
Okay, noted. Thank you. Joe?
I'm just trying to look at the recommendations that we made, and I think that just about all of them can be, you know, addressed when we start meeting with Tate and staff. There may be ones with budget implications, and particularly the one that has to do with getting the right presenters and facilitators for every part of the process. We won't know exactly who those are, but that could have budgetary implications. And I think we want to make sure that we're in sync with the budget timeline.
Okay, I think that that's something to keep in mind when they start meeting, when you start meeting with you having your monthly meeting on the 23rd.
Yeah, I just don't know if that compromises the budget timeline. I just don't know.
No, okay, good.
Okay. Okay, we don't have much time left on this topic, so let's move on to the next one. We'll find that out, Joe, and make sure that we're still able to get that handled before the budget process concludes. The next one, district offices. That one, like council staffing, the council will consider district offices and any community engagement effort around them and its upcoming budget deliberations. So this one for sure has a budget aspect. That we do recommend asking the co-chairs again to testify on this item as well at the upcoming budget listening session. So do we want to have the same motion as we did for council staffing regarding district offices? Again, just it's going to be probably the co-chairs unless they can't make it. Then it's going to be just on the content of the letter and nothing else. And they won't be able, they're there for GTAC. They won't be there for any other reason. Do we have any debate or comments about that? Zach?
Thanks, Jose. Just a point of clarification for the order of priority for who would be doing the presentation. Co-chairs, are you suggesting co-chairs of this subcommittee or co-chairs of the full committee?
I think it's probably going to be the full committee co-chairs preferably. If they can't, then logically would then go to like Julia or I could step in if we're available. Or if you want to be there in
Yeah.
one capacity. And then if we can't, then we'll reach out to those who
Put it to the group.
yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure to clarify things.
So same motion. Do we have any objections to it? For the next steps for district offices being the same as council staffing? Okay, seeing no objections, see a couple thumbs up, so we're gonna go with that for district offices again. Thank you. And now for community engagement, on March 18th, we sent a letter to the city council and chief administrative officer on recommended improvements to community engagement. We'll have Becky from the transition team at our April 9th meeting, at the big GTAC meeting, to share an update about the disciplines and officers' work. There is money in the budget for the engagement officer because it's the same pot of money as the director of the Office of Community and Civic Life. There are a handful of follow-up questions staff have based on the recommendations. Julia will send out the questions to the group who met to create the recommendation and ask for written responses. If you want to receive these questions, please just put your name in the chat so that we can include you in that. And are there any other proposed steps for now?
So when you say put your name for what? For receiving the recommendations?
No, there's questions. There's questions that the staff have based on your the recommendations that were given. So anyone who wants to get those questions and have a hand in answering them. So
Yeah.
Juanita, you definitely should put your name on the chat.
I'm doing that right now.
yeah.
I'm just
But-
as we were talking, I am doing that.
But I think that's the logical next step, getting those questions answered. And then once we do that, then we can see. Perfect. Thank you all. And we kind of rushed through the last three, but I think the bulk of the conversation at the beginning kind of answered a lot of the questions we would have had for all three. So it was a good discussion. I'm glad we had it. Thank you all for the conversation. Now we want to just make sure we continue to check in about our recommendations, and so that we know what's going on next, what the next steps always are going to be. So at this point, we can go next slide, and I'll pass it over to Juliet.
Thanks very much, Jose. Before we receive a report on the engagement to date, I just want to remind you all about our work going into this current engagement period. The next 5 slides are those we shared with the community during our engagement. Next slide, please. In our research, one of the aspects we looked at was council structure and procedures. We found that most peer cities have 5 to 8 council committees with 5 council members per committee, but they have different levels of participation among members. Most cities use a common legislative model and have fairly strong council committee systems. Some common examples of council committees include a committee of the whole, that is the entire council, governance, public health and safety, transportation and infrastructure, planning and sustainability, community development, education, arts and culture, and housing and homelessness. Next slide, please. Looking at council districts and offices, we found that most cities with district representation do not have in-district offices. That's due to safety and security concerns, as well as significant cost burdens with running in-district offices year-round. So many cities have found ways to encourage in-district engagement without offices, such as town halls, pop-up offices, and partnerships with existing community assets to reduce costs. With regard to public input, we found that in cities with strong committee systems, public input on policies is given in council committee meetings as compared to full council meetings. Full council meetings have controlled periods for public input, and most cities do allow for non-agenda item public comment at full council meetings, but it's heavily controlled, similar to how Portland operates its council now. Next slide, please. Oops. Sorry, technical difficulties. Given the research, our subcommittee's current thinking regarding committee structure and procedure is that Portland should have 7 council committees with 4 to 6 members each. One committee is a committee of the whole comprised of the entire council. The other 6 we propose are government performance and finance, public health and public safety, transportation and infrastructure, community development, sustainability and climate, and housing and homelessness. We also think that each committee should have a member from all 4 districts, and every councilor should be a chair or vice chair of a committee. Next slide, please. With regards to public input, we want to assess what works about today's public input processes and what doesn't. Full council meetings currently allow up to 5 people to give 3 minutes of communication on general non-agenda items at the beginning of the meetings. We want to know from community if that serves its purpose. We also want to know if the community wants public input on policies to be focused primarily into a council committee or to the full council meeting. Next slide, please. And finally, regarding district offices, our belief is that every district should have a temporary low-cost office in place by January 1, 2025. We also think it is important to engage in a robust community feedback effort to gather input on what Portlanders want as far as access to their new district-based city councilors. And we believe the final decision on permanent and district offices should be made by the new council with input from this robust community engagement effort. That concludes our work that we shared with the community. Next slide, please. We will now switch gears to our community engagement efforts. Next slide, please. As a reminder, our timeline requires us to disseminate initial recommendations for public input in June. To meet that deadline, we will present our draft recommendations to the GTAC on May 15th. Our current engagement period closes on April 4th. Staff will produce a report on the public input 1 week later by April 11th. Then we will meet on April 24th to finalize our draft recommendations. Next slide, please. Today, staff will report on the engagement to date and what is left to report on, and then we will have ample time to reflect on what this community input means for our thinking. This slide shows the communications and outreach we did in March to share our engagement opportunities. Next slide, please. Before I turn it over to staff to explain who we've engaged and what we've learned to date, I want to remind everyone of the questions we posed to community. We asked, 1, what is your experience accessing or contacting city council members? 2, what are some challenges you face when trying to engage in or stay informed about topics you care about most? 3, what are your hopes for how your future city council members improve your district's outcomes and show up in your district? Consider the balance between time spent at City Hall and in your district. 4, what opportunities do you see for how and when public input is received by the future city council including future council committees? 5, council committees will be created to focus on specific policy areas or themes. What do you think is the most important point for council to consider when creating a committee? And 6, is there anything else you'd like to share? I'll now turn it over to Katie to introduce themselves and share the engagement. I ask that you let Katie get through their slides, and then we'll have time after that for your reflections.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Gavaris. I use they, them pronouns. I'm part of the transition team here at the city. So we're gonna walk through kind of who we heard from and then some of the themes that we can pull out. Before we dive in, I just want to kind of situate us that the public comment period or the online survey that we're getting a lot of the feedback from is still open through April 4th. So this is kind of, you know, to date, engagement to date. And once it closes by mid-April, I'll pull together a report that analyzes all the comments and kind of pull out specific themes that we're hearing from communities like employees versus non-employees, or what the different districts are saying, as well as how it relates to city values and the community desired outcomes. So more to come, and here's a little snapshot so far. So over the pretty intense 2-week engagement period, we did 3 listening sessions where we heard from about 54 people. And Julia was mentioning that this is historically a little low for listening sessions that she's done in the past. And when thinking about it, when kind of thinking about it and analyzing it, we can probably track that back to a short communication window to get the word out, as well as probably a little bit of the topic. Then we had 2 employee town halls where we reached about 1,500 employees. And that's a little low, but also not very dramatic. Then we also had the online survey, which so far through Monday, we had 44 responses, and we have at least a few more trickling in. We've had 1 public comment about this so far, and then we had 1 city briefing with employees, where about 30 employees were present. So next slide. So the next 2 slides are much more on who we heard from. So on the online survey, and then following up on the listening sessions, we distributed a survey that had demographic questions, so we could hear, we could figure out a little bit more on who we were hearing from. And many of the components are not very surprising on who we heard from. I think one of the takeaways from this data is that we didn't successfully really hear from communities traditionally and historically left out of City Hall decision making, and it can be a good it can be a good place for us to think about the summer engagement opportunities and how to do targeted outreach in our upcoming engagement opportunities. But some of the things that stand out is the kind of low engagement with District 1 and East Portland, and the underrepresentation we had from Latine and Black communities in our in who we heard from. And then next slide. And some other things that stand out is the kind of overrepresentation we have on the LGBTQIA community, which is exciting, and had very few folks under 24. And some of the other things we see is that we mainly heard from folks who were already engaging city council. We really didn't hear from a lot of folks who aren't engaging at all, and to get to know a little bit more about what barriers they're experiencing they're experiencing. And we also heard from a lot of city employees. So it'll be interesting to pull out patterns of what employees are thinking versus community members. Next slide. So first I'll walk through the themes that I found from the online survey and the listening session. These are organized in the questions that Juliet just ran through of what we asked folks. So some of the key things we heard from for challenges and that people have while engaging city council, as well as many of these also were similar to people's experiences engaging city council as well. And the number one, very clearly, the number one was the lack of responsiveness and accessibility to counselors. Folks had limited time and financial resources to effectively engage. And there was limited or automatic responses when people tried to email or get in touch with counselors. A few people noted that the opportunities for open testimony are already booked out through May at city council meetings. And then some folks noted the inaccessibility of City Hall, the physical location of it, and then also the culture within it. Another theme we were seeing is transparency and meaningful engagement in the decision-making process. So there were a lot of the perceptions that decisions were made without meaningfully including public input, the unclear policymaking process, and the lack of transparency and communication on when issues are arising or and tracking what decisions are being made about those. The third is the lack of a centralized platform, which leads to information overload, sorry, and inconsistencies on information across the city. And so people had a hard time finding the resources, and also that they had to navigate multiple websites to track things. Next slide. Open testimony, that was referring to the communication testimonies at the beginning of city council and not about specific top policy specific agenda item specific testimonies. So the second question, hopes for future city council members. This one, there was a split between folks really articulating wanting their council members to have an active presence in their districts and addressing district specific challenges, and then also starting to see some pattern, or some people say that they wanted their counselors to continue having a citywide perspective and collaborating with other district counselors. And so for active presence in the district, we were seeing themes around wanting folks to be engaging and holding events in their community, and also having a consistent schedule where they know when folks are going to be in their district, even if they're not there every day. And then we were also, a couple of the comments said they wanted to see more like a 60-40 balance, 60% of their time at City Hall, collaborating with other district counselors and focused on the citywide perspective, and then 40% on in-district issues. And so I think it'll be interesting to see the final numbers, and then also a little bit of who we're hearing from and how that impacts their decisions on that. Some other things we were hearing about kind of the hopes and district outcomes is consistent community engagement that's not dependent on personalities. Multiple people throughout the comments reflected that a lot of their experiences were very dependent on the personality and the person of the city councilor versus any form of kind of standardized practice of engagement across all the commissioners. Wanted to see increased and responsive communication, and then transparent decision-making and accountability to their district constituents. Next slide. So the third is around opportunities for how and when public input is received by future city council and committees. So the first theme that I was seeing was around diverse community engagement events. Folks wanted to have a balance between the formal hearings, testimonies, forums, and then also informal engagements to gather input from community members. Folks were really receptive and enjoyed the listening session format of the listening sessions we offered, and said the informalness to share their opinions felt really unique to other city engagement efforts that they had been a part of. And then also ensuring that representation of diverse demographics was a key component of information gathering for city council and committees. Another one was around accountable and meaningful public input in committees. So allowing the space in committees to bring up less developed ideas so that the public can be a lot more engaged in the formulation stage of policymaking. And there were a number of folks who still wanted the opportunity to offer public testimony before the full council, and that not just be limited to committee testimonies. And then also folks wanted to establish a very clear understanding on how input informs decision-making at city in council, as well as throughout in the committees and between the committees. The last was around transparent decision-making. And also relates back to that desire of a centralized platform for information. And so providing frequent communication about the stage of the decision-making process, the rationale behind policy changes, and then also linking public comments to the specific policy items so that they can be tracked and still heard throughout if an item goes through committees or then back to the full council. Next slide. So the fourth is for around the considerations for developing council committees. And by far the most common theme of this was commenting around the composition of committees, ensuring that there was subject matter experts on the committees, and that there was diverse and representative community members on the committees as well. Folks were the theme around transparent and clear committee scope and processes. This was kind of a broad bucket that was teased out in a couple different codes throughout the data analysis, but this one was really hoping for speaking to wanting to prevent duplication between committees, and ensuring that there is clear criteria for what committee does what, and efficient decision-making processes between them. So so it protects the capacity of the community members involved and being involved in the process, considering the political viability to avoid creating some committees that have kind of all the decision-making power and some committees that have all of the policies that are kind of overloaded with policies versus some that have a very slow process. And then establishing rules that are consistent between all the committees for how you collect and submit feedback, and clear timelines for how communities can engage. The last was around effective communications. Folks wanted to see that the committees were developed and clearly communicated what is in the purview of the city versus the county, metro, or the state. Some folks were reflecting on what type of committee themes they wanted to see, and one theme that was coming out was like, could we focus it around like intended outcomes, for example, affordable housing as a theme of a committee. And people wanted to make sure that community knows where their advocacy is most effective on that, what the city has authority and what that committee is making decisions on versus what the city does not work on. And then ensuring accessibility for the committee meetings in the evenings, weekends, and then also their location. So now we're gonna, next slide. So now, looking at the themes we heard from employees, and it's not to say employees' voices wasn't heard in the listening sessions and the online surveys, but these were specifically employee sessions. So the employee town halls were very large events, had 600 and 800 folks in the two. And we had the Q&A function open like we have in this webinar. And so people could upvote questions and then also ask their own. And so the themes were pulled out between the questions that were most upvoted or asked the most amount of times. And in the blue are the questions that had the highest upvotes in the town halls in general. But there were 4 themes that came out of kind of all the questions and comments submitted. The first was on clarifying the roles and expectations for council positions, and as well as the new positions within the city reorganization chart. I'm not going to read the questions, but the second theme was around council committees, policy development, and decision-making process. The questions were about the structure and function of council committees and how it affects the day-to-day operations for a lot of the city employees. Third theme, next slide. Thanks, June. The third theme is on the transition and implementation. So asking around the intended outcomes and seeking clarification on hiring timelines and the impact on staff. And the fourth question was a lot of accountability questions on how public participation and community input would be protected and also uplifted in the transition in the new form of government. So next slide. The last kind of synthesis I have is the listening session feedback surveys also had questions about the actual event itself and what people enjoyed and could see improved. And so some of the things that were really well received about the listening sessions were the event logistics, specifically for the in-person. People called out the timing and the childcare and food options that were provided. And another thing that was well received was the culture of respect and informal conversations that they felt that differed from other city engagement events. People really liked the small group conversations and the being able to share their opinions, not in like a big question and answer format. And people really appreciated the thought-provoking questions that structured the listening session. So some opportunities for improvement that folks called out was to clearly communicate the format of the interactive structure. Some people noted that they were surprised that we had those small breakout conversations and were expecting more of a question and answer. So thinking about if we do listening sessions over the summer, how we can communicate what to expect a little bit more. There was, a lot of comments around the complexity of the topic. And so providing executive summaries, and if speakers are using speaker scripts, to share those before the presentation as well for better understanding. Like I said, there was a lot of comments on how we could make such a complex topic a little bit more digestible. One of the suggestions was to break it down potentially into multiple sessions. Another was to ensure that there was enough time for the last question and additional sharing. The last question was like, is there anything else you want to touch on or share with us? And so making sure we have time for that in the small group conversations. And the last was a note that representative voices were still not being captured in this process, and to continue engagement efforts until the data is saturated. So that is what I am. Yeah, that's what I have. I think there are some questions in the chat, but I also think this time is then for you to talk about how it impacts your future recommendations.
Thank you very much, Kate. We now have time to share reflections on how the public input we've received impacts our subcommittee's work and recommendations. Just as a reminder, we only really have one meeting after this one before we present our draft recommendations to GTAC. Before the next meeting, Julia, and I will begin drafting recommendations for your consideration. We'll base the draft recommendations on the work to date, community input, and what you shared today. So please really think about what recommendations you want to add or modify based on the community input, and be as specific as possible. Juliet?
Well, I think we could spend a lot of time looking at this data and asking questions, but I'm just going to ask one thing, which is about Katie's first slide, where it showed a significantly greater attendance to the virtual listening sessions than the actual. And I would have actually expected the opposite, because I think people have missed in-person interactions so much throughout the pandemic, but that's not what the numbers are showing. So I'm suggesting that we might learn from that and incorporate some of that in our recommendations about community outreach from here on out. And I'm not sure what that would be. I'm just flagging that because I think it could be a valuable tool.
Thanks, Juliet. Joe?
Two things. One is, in terms of who participated, I was really surprised that District 2 had such sort of overrepresentation and District 3 such underrepresentation. 1 and 4 sort of ran true to form, but 2 and 3 I confused me, and I wonder if there's an easy explanation for that. And then I'll ask another question, or no one has an answer to that.
Can I maybe respond to that? Because I think I have a similar question, which was a question to you, Kate, which I don't know where the input point was, like how the data was collected for district. Because I know that like when we did the virtual, at least it was like a open call to chat where what district you're representing. And I was wondering if that was what it was from, or if it was from when we signed up.
The district data's, we collected zip codes from all the participants, and then the IDC District R program that's still on the city website still has, you can put in your zip code and it tells you what district you're in. So I use that to see the district data.
And then the other thing that I wanted to ask, the value of doing this kind of thing is partly to see where there are themes and where there are a lot of people saying the same thing, but it's also valuable to get bright ideas, even if only one person thought of it. And I wonder, Katie, maybe you're the right person to send these to, but there were 3 or 4 things that really jumped out at me as really good ideas. Can I just send those to you so that they get into the mix and don't get lost?
Yes, please. I'm definitely capturing specific suggestions that people had, and that'll be part of the report. It just didn't make it into the larger themes, but please send them in case just so we can uplift them in the report.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. I also had, just to tag on to Joe's, is there a way to see the notes, not the synthesis of the notes, but the notes for all the sessions so we can review the kinds of things that were said?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, I'll leave it at that.
Yes, if you could send that, that'd be great. Juanita?
Yes, I have a couple of things that I want to mention, but I don't know if this is the time regarding the presentation on the slides. And but let me make the comment first about my reaction to the data. I was very concerned about the fact that we were writing letters, making specific recommendations to the transition team and to the city. And then I thought it's going to be interesting when we do the interviews with people actually listening from the community. And I was very relieved to see that basically the feedback validates a lot of the recommendations that we're working on, right now as a team, as a committee. And I think that is, that makes me feel like, well, we're not as much as, I'm out of touch as much as I thought I might have been. When you were looking in the slide presentation, but I will let people do about this because I don't want to take the attention from just the feedback. Go ahead. And then maybe later on, I will ask my questions.
Okay, Destiny?
I had one question in the chat, but then also just a comment made earlier, which was, what does limited financial resources mean, or how is that seen with regard to engaging? Just that part specifically.
That one was around, that one was twofold, that higher the perception where money influences the attention of commissioners, or can influence the ability to be heard. And then that also is the amount of capacity and time and I am sorry that it's taking, the words are really struggling, that there it was perceived as a barrier when folks saying, as someone who's low income, I cannot attend these events, or I'm working during the day when the work sessions happen, and can't attend and do advocacy in the middle of a day. So there was twofold of how that theme came up.
And then thank you, Katie. I would specify those two because I think those are very powerful statements and things here. So being explicit on what that means is a very powerful thing to tell city councilors, and clearly identifies a problem. And then I wanted to also follow up, so thank you, with Juliet's comment about like the power social media, or not social media, a hybrid or virtual setting has. And I agree, I hear you, but then I feel like we're still going to get the same demographic data if we just continue that approach. And so I think there's still a time and place for in-person. I think that needs to be a lot of trust building with this city, a lot of great built communication effort with the city that's consistent and accountable. And I think if we want to do hybrid, then I think the city really needs to reflect on itself and realize that they are just really bad at engaging young Portlanders, diverse Portlanders, people who are working, who are low income, and they need to spend money asking people to help them create a virtual setting where people can actually engage. And then that goes on to my third comment of, if we want the committees to hold a lot of power in the city council system of policy recommendation, public input, and those are on the weekends and evenings, should we just acknowledge that we want our city councilors to be working during the public's free time regularly, which is, the 5 to late, because if that's what it is, that's what it is. That's what our expectations should be, so that people can show up. And so people with lobbying power or financial resources aren't the only ones showing up in the middle of the day. Just my reflections. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you, Destiny. Terry?
Yeah, a couple things. In reflections on the process itself, I'll say I remain not a fan of the listening session format. However, I have a however coming, but I think the listening session format filters this too much. We get notes that are then highlighted by Katie, and then presented to us, filtered, and then we have to do something. As as someone who I actually went to all of the listening sessions so that I could actually listen and see how that works. And it works okay. But I found myself learning more by being there. And I think that's important to a listening session, and it's just not possible to do that sort of thing. So anyway, that said, one of the things I noticed by going there is that people higher up on the ladder of engagement with the city council, like people that are part of advisory committees, or testify frequently, you know, those sorts of folks that have a little juice and skin in the game or whatever, were actually liked the engagement with the council sort of as is, and thought and thought through our recommendations and liked our recommendations and were able to engage in those recommendations really well. Folks that were lower on the scale of engagement, I thought, were more typically frustrated. Folks that felt they weren't being heard, that it was very difficult to be part of the process. And to me, that was, I thought that was really persuasive, in that the more we can bring people up the ladder of engagement, the better engagement you're going to get. And the better satisfaction you'll get from residents and citizens. So I think that was something that I took away just out of the process itself. But I also took away that those small group work was really fascinating, really interesting, and really helpful and useful for me to understand things. And it made me think that these were more like focus groups. And had we conceived them as focus groups, we may have learned a lot more. If they were like facilitated like a focus group. You could be a little bit more intentional about getting the right representation into a focus group if you're conceiving it that way, rather than just a broad listening session for whoever comes up will listen to. So those were process things, just my reflections. The second thing is now I'm concerned about our process to finish off our recommendations. So based on the listening sessions, I changed my mind about a couple things, but mostly reinforced a lot of what our thinking is. But the process for me to get that information into a conversation at our next subcommittee meeting, I guess, is where it has to happen. We need to sort of clarify. And my guess is, you know, I write it up and send it to the co-chairs and Julia, and you massage it. But if there's a way to make that slightly more interactive or interesting or something, I want to hear possibilities for it. So those are my reflections.
Thank you, Terry. I will say that something you touched on has been brought up already, where we lose a little something between there's someone taking notes and then it's being synthesized. And even though I love the setup, unlike you, like I really like how it was structured, I do agree with that we lose something, and not all of us could attend all three to be able to see just, oh, there's things that are missing that stood out to me, but then they didn't stand out to the note taker, and it didn't stand out to Katie when she did their synthesis. So I think in the future, when we do these listening sessions, getting the notes very quickly afterwards, so that if we do have things that, oh, we heard this, that we thought it was important, that maybe was missing, it might be worth, like if the notes are being taken in real time, so it shouldn't be difficult to at least get us the notes. So I don't know if that might be a thing that we can do in the future to improve what we get out of this process. Destiny?
Yeah, kind of just following off of that, like there was some great ideas, creative thinking, which is part of the beauty of a community session where people are like proposing solutions that works for them. Like they're like, this is something that would help me. And I didn't see any recommendation like that reflected, just the problems. But like, I feel like if we get the notes and like we could see that, look at the recommendations, like I would like to have actionable steps so that if we send this to city council, they see like, this is the problem. This is what we heard, some ideas, you know, like otherwise they just get complicit in the mediocre. And I just don't want that to happen. And so we have great data. I think we still need more of it, especially because we see the data. So like, I'm wondering like, what are the next steps for us to do? And then also for our staff to do if we do want to make sure we booster that demographic data to then actually get a better recommendation and better ideas that maybe the people that did show up didn't even think of. So I don't know, that's just kind of where I'm at.
Thank you. Julia? No? Yes.
Yeah, let me just verbally respond to Joe's question in the chat and maybe partially address some of Destiny's comments. So, and I think honestly, what I was putting in the chat was kind of a follow-up to Terry, so that's my thread. But I think, you know, so first, this wasn't the engagement report. We're trying to give you access to the information as early as possible. You know, our last listening session and employee town halls were Thursday.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, the days are blurring together. So now what Katie's gonna do is gonna generate the report, but our survey is even still open, right? So it closes April 4th. Then we'll do a report in the way that we talked about a meeting or two ago. Then we'll send that to you. And then we have one more meeting to kind of revise your work. Again, just before you present draft recommendations. So as a reminder, like this was a 2.5 week engagement period. This is early engagement to kind of see, I think to Terry's point, like, are you learning anything from that changes the way you're thinking about these draft recommendations, right? So just as a reminder about the flow, like the engagement period is in the summer. So what I was putting in the chat, these reflections about engagement have been helpful. However, I think what the chairs and I are going to need are like, how is what you're hearing and learning changing the way you're thinking about your recommendations? So if you have any of those in your head, either right now or tomorrow or over the week, you know, anytime really, but I'll take them as soon as you feel like you can articulate them. That helps us start just like putting pen to paper about how your recommendations might have evolved based on what you've heard. So that's all. And also, if you want to call me and give them to me verbally, you don't have to write some narrative about it. But I would just encourage you to do that. And then I can share them with the chairs and we can start building a document so that one next meeting, you have something, right, that begins to reflect your evolved thinking based on the engagement. Is that clear?
Yes, thank you, Julia.
Thanks.
Zach?
And just to be, you said this, and I was also like kind of simultaneously thinking about what I added in the chat, which is we should all be getting as many people to fill out that survey as possible to especially improve our population, you know, have it be more reflective of the population as a whole for Portland. My question for you, Julia, was timeline that works for you and the chairs to be able to synthesize our own reflections and reactions to the data from the survey, because I imagine that there's going to be a time delay from the survey, and Katie and team might be trying to synthesize it or provide us the raw data. I think both are great. I would agree with Terry that raw data is fine, like, and also just much more expeditious. So sharing that is a-okay with me for survey stuff. But timeline, like I you know, want to make sure that the chairs and you have enough time to try to package it together to make sure that when we meet April 20, 20, I don't remember what the specific date is, but that we have something you know, ready to go.
Thanks, Zach. Juanita?
I don't know if about this is the time to do this, but when we were talking about the different committees, I'm going to go back to the slideshow, the slide that we were looking at. When we're talking about the committees, the number of committees that are being recommended and the titles of each of the committee, I was wondering, and please educate me because I don't know anything about this, if this is something that it should be under a committee or not. But under which committee will be, or should we recommend a different committee for that will house the community engagement and the other three areas that the city has decided to pull together, which is communications, equity, and sustainability? Because that needs to be some place where somebody's going to put attention to it. That's a huge piece.
I don't think we know exactly where things are going to land in committees yet because those haven't been decided. But that's important to note that you think that's important, that it's important. So not to have it get lost in the shuffle, I think is really what you're trying to say. So yes, I think that's an important thing to note for our future recommendations.
Yeah, we need to keep that in mind because we need to make sure that so we won't go by the way and then we find out that, well, no, we didn't think about it. That is a piece that I think is very important. The other one is when we talking about that when we made the recommendation and we voted for it, that the final decision to have to actually build a building, in each of the districts, when we had the discussion, I recall, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I recall that I actually said we need to make sure that the question is not that the new council is going to determine if they're permanent offices, that I think that the permanent offices has to be a must, especially now after listening to people. Not as many as we wanted, we thought we will, but I mean, at least the ones that we listened to, they want district office, they expect district offices. So I don't know if we can correct that and change it because we didn't say the council is not going to determine if there is permanent offices in the districts. The new council is going to determine or decide if there is going to be the expense to build a building in each of the districts to have the offices. I don't know if you recall that, but I recall clearly that I actually said, I want to make sure that I clarify that because if it is not clarified, then, I don't think that we want to leave the door open by saying, well, yeah, maybe they decide that we don't want any district offices at all. I don't know if that makes any sense, so please let me know. Please ask me or tell me, no, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, Juanita, I understand. I think I understand what you're asking, but I think that is what we said. We left it up to because that's one of the reasons I disagreed, because I did not want to just leave it up to the future, but the GTAC voted that it's up to the future council to decide, and they can decide no district offices. They can. We didn't say they had to decide that they had to have it.
Well, I recall clearly that I said that needs to be corrected when the final recommendations were going to be written up. I said, I want to make sure that there's clarified and I was told, yes, it's going to be clarified. And then after reading again now the thing more clearly, more slowly, and really seeing what it says, it wasn't changed at all. It
wasn't because it at the meeting it was brought up and it got voted down like that.
No, but no, I'm not talking about. I think there was an issue. No, the question was about the different offices that there was 3 recommendations. He voted for the second one, that they should be temporary office until the new council takes over and determines if they want to do the buildings, because that's what the staff asked us to recommend, that they don't have to have a whole budget before the time. You see, that was the issue, not the between the 3 that we voted, but we voted for the second one because it was only temporary offices, and the new council will determine if they want to build or have buildings, the way the city had asked the staff to do it. So I'm just concerned about that, because but it's not the way, it's not what you're saying that voted against it. No, we voted for that number 2. It's just that was the thing that needed to be changed. The wording needed to be changed. And I was told that when it was put it down, it was going to be corrected. And I realized now it wasn't corrected. It's just a word.
Courtney, I think we need to discuss this offline, but I think maybe you misunderstood or we misunderstood you. There was some misunderstanding, because I think most of us understood at the end of that meeting that what was decided was that the future council decides. And some of us did not like that, but that was what was decided.
Well, yeah. Is anybody else got different understanding of that? I am the only one who didn't get it. I guess so. Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Yeah, that just worried, because as I was reading the information that Julia sent us ahead of time to review, and I was reading and I thought, oh, that's not the way we say that it should be.
Yeah, and if you want, we could talk about it further.
Okay, thank you.
Another time. Yeah,
Thank you for the time.
no problem. Yeah, thank you. And I see that's everything. So we will get the recommendations working, and then we'll get them back to everyone for the next subcommittee. And we could bring back the slides so we could talk about the upcoming meetings. Perfect. As always, the recording of this meeting is going to be posted on the committee's website and available after the meeting ends on the Office of Management and Finance YouTube channel. Now these meetings, the budget work group meets April 1st. The voter candidate and education outreach committee meets April 2nd. Our next regular full committee meeting is April 9th. And this subcommittee meets again on April 24th, Zach. That will be our last meeting for presenting our draft recommendations to GTAC on May 15th.
Okay.
Next slide, please. And the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your participation.